First, I will briefly introduce the background of the issue, and then I will briefly introduce the basic idea of DRC's proposal, as well as some implications. To understand China's climate change policy, we need to know the context of the issue. The first is that China is in a process of rapid economic taking off, and the next 2 decades will be very critical for China, and to ensure rapid growth is a top priority for the Chinese government. The second, China has to maintain a rapid growth here. China needs to create more than 12 million new jobs each year. Otherwise, we have trouble. Thirdly, China has strong motivation to reduce emissions because China's current growth model is insufficient and not sustainable. So we need to shift our growth model to no carbon growth model. Lastly, China faces huge pressure from the Western countries. But on this issue, China really feels very unfair. So China needs to deal with the climate change issue. We need to achieve 4 targets. First is that China needs to maintain a rapid growth in the future. Secondly, to shift the growth model to a low carbon growth model. Thirdly is not only defend our rights on emission reduction, but also play a constructive role in the future. So in this background, DRC organized research on climate change issue. The basic idea of DRC's proposal is to clearly define common but differentiated responsibilities here. We can establish a national emission account according to each country's emission entitlements and real emissions and trade emissions here. So the balance of each country's emission account exactly represents each country's responsibility on emission reduction here. The core of the problem is how to define each country's emission entitlements here. Put it in a simple way, if a country's per capita emission is higher than the average level, it means it has imposed extra harm to the other countries and should pay for its extra emission. So that means the per capita principle should apply in allocating each country's emission entitlements. I use a figure to show the time horizon. The 3 points stand for different periods, in the past, the present, and the future. There are 3 steps in our proposal. First is to apply the per capita principles in the past to define each country's historic emission entitlements, and then we can turn the unclear historic responsibilities to clear emission deficits here. The over-emitted countries we have emission deficits, and the other countries we have emission surplus. The step 2 is to scientifically decide the global emission targets in the future and then allocate it among different countries according to per capita principle. The total balance of 2 periods is the country's total emission capacity. Once the national emission account is established, we can establish a very open system to incorporate the various existing proposals at the international level. Any existing collaborative mechanism can be used as long as the effectiveness is eventually reflected on each country's balance of emission account. At the national level, all countries can choose the domestic approach as long as they meet the emission capacity too. First, they can either use the emission trading scheme or carbon tax or any other approaches. Secondly, they can decide their own annual approaches. So in our proposal, the flaws of the Kyoto Protocol are overcome. The first is what countries can be covered. The second is the global reduction target built into our proposal. So the additionality problem of sodium has been overcome. So I would like to introduce some implications of our proposal. Some people argue that because China is a huge country, and so China should take more responsibility on emission reduction. But in our proposal, a country's responsibility is defined by how much it has emitted. If China was not a single big country, but economic bloc consisting of 30 small poor countries, and then what's the substantial difference? Many people may think that a country with less emission makes big contribution to emission reduction, but in this case, the country A's emission is zero, but country B, world emissions is done by country B. But can we say the country A is a bad guy and country B A is a good guy and country B is a bad guy? Yeah. But in this case, country A sold its quota to country B and imported emission-bad goods from country B. And so, in this case, the two countries make the same contribution to global emission reduction. China's embedded emissions account for about 20% or something. In some politicians in Western countries enjoy the emission-bad goods made in China, and at the same time they blame China for its high emission and threaten to impose a carbon tax. It's very unfair. Many people may think China will greatly benefit from the per capita principle. Actually not. The per capita principle only means no carbon growth model. But under per capita principle, China's per capita emission can only reach what average level. It can never reach the current high level of the high level of the real emission in the developed countries. So China has to adopt a no carbon growth model. It's impossible for China to adopt the business as usual model. So China needs to try its hardest to reduce its emission. So then, how is the potential for China to reduce emission? China's energy needs will continue to grow, but the low demand can largely be met by renewable energy in the future. So China's emission will not increase as fast as many projections suggest. Secondly, China has a very ambitious investment plan on new energy, and China as a latam, it has acquired advantage is at the same level on developing new energy and electric auto of the developed countries. Certainly, the Chinese domestic market and self-based growth is expected, and the share in the GDP will keep increasing, and it means emission intensity will significantly reduce in the future. So in our proposal, not just in our proposal, the biggest disagreement between a developed country and the developing country is how to share burden on emission reduction. As far as I can say, it's extremely hard for either side to make big concessions. And I trust that we have the right time to reach an agreement in the future. Perhaps the dramatic solution in the future is a technological innovative breakthrough in the future. Finished. So if the production no longer relies on the carbon emission, and the emission quotas are no longer available assets, then I think the disagreement will be automatically solved. Anyway, we should be optimistic with low carbon in the future.